What I thought I would do this afternoon is to talk to you about a soldier's perspective on the challenge of leadership in the 21st century. And I absolutely recognise that you are millennials, and I'm going to try and talk a language that millennials will understand. I'm not going to sink into abbreviations and all the other things that soldiers so often do. But I am going to describe a bit about soldiering, because as a soldier, I tend to distinguish between what we call the nature of war and what we call the character of warfare. And you'll understand why these terms are relevant when I explain my thesis. The former, that is the nature of war, never changes. It's always visceral, it's always violent, it's always influenced by friction, when the easiest things become really difficult to do, and it's always about human interaction and about politics. And that's why it's relevant when we talk about leadership. The character of warfare, though, that does change, and it evolves, principally with technology. And the 21st century is really no different. And this time, I think the key determinant is the pervasiveness of information and data. And this affects all of us, regardless of our professions. And I think it's having a profound effect on leadership. And I'll come back to that. But talking of data and information, let's consider the facts for a moment. The total data accumulated in 2012 and 2013 was more than 9 times the total data created from the beginning of time until 2011. Now you'll know that as millennials, but it's always a surprise to my generation and the High Commissioner's generation, I suspect. The 1800s, of course, were all about mining gold, iron and other metals. The 1900s were all about drilling, oil, natural gas and shale oil, for example. The 2000s, though, are going to be about mining again, the mining of data. Data is stored in servers across the globe, creating veritable data mines in multiple locations. But less than 0.5% of the data is ever analysed. No wonder we're investing in the technology to mine it, just as we did for gold and oil. Think robotic processing, automation and data analytics. So data is changing the way we do business, how we communicate, how we make decisions and how we lead. Now, returning for a moment to the character of warfare, this has spawned some new truths that have a bearing on all of us, regardless of whether we're soldiers or political leaders. First and foremost, the distinction between peace and war is now blurred. Our opponents have become masters at exploiting the seams between peace and war. What constitutes a weapon these days, in this grey area, no longer has to go bang. Energy, cash as bribes, corrupt business practices, cyber attacks, assassination, propaganda, or even good old-fashioned military intimidation. All of these are examples of weapons used to gain advantage in what is now, I think, an era of constant competition. So that's the first new truth for me. The second one, I think, is that foreign and domestic policy now overlap significantly. The globalisation that provides the opportunity for greater prosperity also brings complex challenges. And in the UK, the street blocks in Bradford replicate precisely the village communities in Kashmir whence the residents are drawn. And it's no surprise that our High Commissions and missions overseas these days have significant Home Office representation on their teams. And that's why our High Commissioner, I know, talks about the living bridge, for example, between our two countries. Now, the third new truth for me is that our enemies use the information environment to identify our weakness, to utilise commercially available technology, to exploit, or in the case of Russia, build a new way of warfare to undermine our strengths. Consider an article that was in Thursday's London Times, where Edward Lucas wrote, Russia uses thousands of automated bot accounts which invent or mindlessly amplify controversies, hoaxes and rumours. The aim is not to win the argument, but to stoke it. A recent investigation in the US showed that Russian-sponsored accounts were simultaneously promoting the anti-police at Black Lives Matter cause and the pro-police at Blue Lives Matter cause. Cyber detective work shows that though these tweets and Facebook posts originate from the ghostly underworld, they are shared and believed by real people. These and similar stunts deepen our social and political divisions. The next truth for me is that the battlefield that we all fight on in the future is going to be far more decentralised. And it's now a fishbowl in which everyone can look in and take a view on our young junior leadership and what they're doing on that battlefield. We now have not just what was called strategic corporals because of the impact they have at the strategic level, we also now have politicians who can be tacticians and, of course, armchair pundits. And the fourth new truth for me is that success now is invariably determined by the triumph of the narrative. Terms like defeat and victory are not as clear as they once were. And in this era of post-truth, people are easily persuaded by what they want to hear rather than objective facts. That is why we call it fake news, and it's why I think policymakers tend to be motivated by tomorrow's headlines. Now, for us in the military, this means that we have to develop battlefield commanders who have to think differently about the battlefield. They have to think about the information environment in which they're now operating. And that means they have to think about a much broader audience than just simply the enemy. It was put very well the other day in a new book that was published by somebody called David Patrikarakos, a book called War in 140 Characters. He had fought in Ukraine and he observed, I was caught up in two wars, one fought on the ground with tanks and artillery, and an information war fought largely, though not exclusively, through social media. And counterintuitively, it mattered more who won the war of words and narratives than those who had the most potent weaponry. Politics, and therefore warfare as an extension of politics, is as much today about real-life campaigning as it is about social media. Communication, which was once the sole preserve of words and voice, is now moving to video and images. Again, consider the facts. Over 50% of the world's population is under the age of 30. 96% of millennials like you will have joined a social media network. It took radio 38 years to reach 50 million people, TV 13 years, the internet 4 years, Facebook added over 200 million in less than a year. If Facebook was a country, it would be the third largest in the world behind China and your own country. 78% of consumers trust peer recommendations. Only 14% trust adverts. And only 18% of traditional TV campaigns generate positive responses. 24 of 25 of the world's largest newspapers are experiencing record declines in non-internet based circulation. We no longer search for news, news searches for us. We will no longer search for products and services, they will find us via social media. As Eric Qualman puts it in his recent book, we don't have a choice on whether we do social media, the question is how well do we do it? Now the deductions that I draw from all of this are first, that ideas are worthless unless they are delivered through the right media to the relevant audience. Hence the ability to communicate and tell the story is an essential quality of modern leadership. We no longer have any secrets anymore. There's nowhere to hide. So as leaders, one's values and credibility have never been more important. And there is no substitute, therefore, for transparency and honesty. As it was explained to Bill Clinton, tell it early, tell it all, tell it yourself. And the media environment is characterised by anarchy, and this anarchy requires a different approach to leadership. This brings me back to why, as a soldier, I talk about the character of warfare. Because we, as soldiers, have to be comfortable with anarchy. We have to be comfortable with delegation and decentralisation. And I think all professions now, in the environment I've described, have got to become more comfortable with delegation and decentralisation. Hence, in the military, our warfighting doctrine is based on something we call mission command. This enables us to overcome an enemy in the most chaotic and demanding circumstances, i.e., like the anarchic arrangements the media create these days. This enables us to generate agility and tempo. But importantly, this doctrine is based on mutual trust between leaders and those they lead. Leaders have a duty to provide the guidance, including resources and constraints, that then allow their subordinate to use it, have a duty to act with loyalty and discipline. It's a two-way process, with the trust being guaranteed by every soldier, whether leader or led, living our clearly understood values and standards as soldiers and setting an appropriate example. This is a culture that empowers leaders at every level. It requires, though, leaders to really know those they lead, to understand them, and to place the care of their subordinates at the forefront of all that they do. The Victorians understood this well. Charles Kingsley's fable, The Water Babies, had two interesting apocryphal characters. Mrs. Do as you would be done by, and Mrs. Be done as you did. And this encouraged Victorian children to think about others and to view things through the other person's perspective. The key point, I think, in this anarchic set of circumstances that the 21st century media environment represents is that you've got to be a downwardly looking leader rather than an upwardly looking leader. William Barclay's commentary on Mark's Gospel put it well when he said, it wasn't that Jesus abolished ambition, rather he recreated and sublimated ambition. For the ambition to rule, he substituted the ambition to serve. For the ambition to have things done for us, he substituted the ambition to do things for others. That, I think, leads to a set of general principles which are inculcated in our doctrine of leadership within the British Army. First and foremost, we work tirelessly to really know those that we're leading. Secondly, we listen. We encourage learning and development. We set sensible constraints, and then we allow our soldiers to learn from honest mistakes. We require our soldiers to respect each other. We ask ourselves, what have I done for my soldiers today? We believe in providing clarity of purpose, and we don't shy away from making decisions. We take pride in setting the right example, in accepting responsibility, and in striving to improve ourselves as leaders. And importantly, we live by the values and standards that we expect our soldiers to live by. This is what we call values-based leadership. And my thesis to you is that in the environment in which we are now all living and breathing, it's never been more important to have a values-based approach to leadership. So to conclude, 6 pieces of advice for you as coming people in this environment, and I hope as leaders of the future. First and foremost, successful leaders, I think, take the initiative, they don't accept the status quo, and they have a clear idea of what they are trying to achieve. They have a plan. This means that they are determined to shape events rather than being shaped by them. They set clear direction. They sell their story. They make sure it is well understood by those they lead, and then they ensure that the idea is executed. Importantly, they know, they care for, and they motivate those they lead. Fifth, they have empathy and the humility to listen, as well as the humility to adjust the plan when it's going wrong. And last, and perhaps arguably most importantly, they set standards and have the moral courage to enforce them. Remember to look yourselves in the mirror. It's vital, I would suggest. So to my mind, the 21st century requires leadership that is somewhat nuanced from perhaps the 20th century. And it's driven by this pervasiveness of information, and it requires leaders, I think, to reflect long and hard on the standards that they set and to look after those that they lead. Thank you.